December 26th, 1194, Iesi, Italy. A tent stands in the town square, and inside, a mother screams. Women and midwives of the town file inside, allowed to witness this momentous, even divine event. Crowds gather outside. Then suddenly, the screams stop, and a baby cries. She comes to the flaps of the tent and steps out into the cold air. Her hair is matted to her forehead, determination in her crow-footed eyes, a baby nursing at her breast. Many doubted that she could naturally have a child, for she was 40 in an age where most women bear children as teenagers and had been trying for 10 years. So she wants them to see. In fact, it's actually crucial that she can prove the baby is hers, for this is no regular woman. She is Constance, Queen of Sicily, and Empress of the Holy Roman Empire, and the suckling baby will one day rule these astonished spectators. But this child will be more than an emperor. One day, he will be called the Stupor Mundi, the marvel of the world. A king at 3 years old, he will be the godson to a pope, a crusader, an author, a general, and a scientist. He will become known for both an early treatise on birds as well as horrifying human experiments. He will battle 3 popes, be excommunicated 4 times, and declared a predecessor of the Antichrist. He is the unholy Roman Emperor, Frederick II. An unholy Roman emperor, you say? That is a hell of a loaded headline. Actually, to help you spot biases in today's media coverage, check out this video's sponsor, Ground News. In September of 1198, Queen Constance held a joint coronation in Palermo. She would be Queen of Sicily and southern Italy, and her son Frederick II would be king and her heir. There were only 2 problems. First, Frederick was just a few months shy of 4 years old, and second, Constance, already ill, died almost immediately after the coronation. This was obviously bad news for Frederick, whose father, the Holy Roman Emperor Henry VI, had died the previous year. But it was great news for Pope Innocent III, who Constance's will designated as Frederick's new guardian. Even better, after his father's death, Constance had Frederick give up his fresh claim to the Holy Roman Empire. But backing up for a second, why was that such good news? I mean, it's not like Innocent really wanted a pet little toddler king. Nah, Innocent was psyched because all of this solved a huge problem for the papacy. See, for generations, the Holy Roman Emperors, who had to be elected by the nobility and controlled modern Germany as well as a good deal of northern Italy, had been trying to get their hands on the Kingdom of Sicily, which included southern Italy. Except doing that was a direct threat to the Papal States, since linking those 2 kingdoms would mean it was completely surrounded. And to the horror of the papacy, Frederick's father Henry VI had managed to do it. See, after the Second Crusade, he'd captured Richard the Lionheart. Hey, crossover to an old series, look at that. And would ransom him to Eleanor of Aquitaine. Double crossover! Then used the money to raise an army and capture Sicily. In fact, on the same day Constance was giving birth to Frederick, Henry was in Sicily eliminating the power of Constance's illegitimate half-brother Tancred, who'd recently died. Oh, and he did it in some very horrific ways, so if you'd like to skip the brutality, head to this timecode here. First, Henry castrated and blinded Tancred's 7-year-old son, so he couldn't inherit the throne. Then he burned all of the nobles who attended Tancred's coronation in a massive bonfire. Then, just for good measure, I suppose, he ordered Tancred dug up and his corpse decapitated. But now, with both Henry and Constance dead, and Frederick having given up being the heir to the Holy Roman Empire, Innocent III no longer had to worry about the same man controlling northern and southern Italy and making him a Pope sandwich. In fact, if he raised Frederick to be loyal to the papacy, he could have a dependable ally running a Sicily independent from the Holy Roman Empire. And to help that happen, he assigned a rising star of the church to be Frederick's tutor, Cencio Savelli. And while this pint-sized king of Sicily was a wild little boy, it was very clear from the beginning he was an exceptionally bright one. Though Frederick did also refuse to be contained in the palace. He ran all over Palermo as though it was his playground, following his curiosity and, if his later life is anything to go by, probably trying to find really cool birds. Yeah, Frederick would have a lifelong fascination with birds, their behavior, their anatomy, and especially their use in hunting. And since he was often just sort of ignored, he did have a lot of time to run around chasing birds and doing whatever took his fancy. Yet that adolescent avian anarchy was also being mirrored in the political situation at court. To put it simply, Sicily was a mess. When Constance had died, a German military captain who'd served with Henry besieged and captured Palermo, claiming to be regent and Frederick's protector. Though technically independent, that captain was connected to Frederick's uncle Philip, who was now ruling the Holy Roman Empire, uniting Sicily and Germany again, prompting Pope Innocent to excommunicate the captain and declare a crusade to retake Sicily. This would be the story, essentially, for all of Frederick's childhood. Another German captain would take over, they'd fight the Pope, and occasionally just threaten to take Frederick's throne entirely on the pretext that Constance had been too old to have a baby, and Frederick was just a peasant imposter. Of course, we don't want to belabor this period too much, because we actually don't know much about Frederick's childhood. But here's the things we need to remember about the world that Frederick grew up in. 1. Sicily and southern Italy was kind of a up-for-grabs mess. 2. The papacy deeply feared a union of Sicily's territories with the Holy Roman Empire. And 3. Innocent hoped that if he put Frederick on the throne, they'd have a friendly ally who would defend it from the Holy Roman Empire, especially if he had Sicily ally with France. And that's why, as soon as Frederick came of age, Innocent hooked him up with Constance of Aragon, which made things a little bit awkward when she showed up in Sicily for a few reasons. Can you guess them? Well, not only did she have the same name as his mother, but actually because young Frederick went by his Sicilian name of Constantino or Constantine, so she had the same name as him. He was also only 14, whereas she was 30 and sophisticated. Her previous husband, now dead, was the King of Hungary, and her brother was King of Aragon. What she found when she arrived must have shocked her, because since his parents had died early and he'd basically been ignored by a series of regents, Frederick came off a bit like a feral child who was also a genius. His days had been filled with hunting and falconry, while at night he'd devour history books by candlelight. And one of his favorite things was to just roam Palermo, speaking to and observing the different communities there. The island had been Muslim territory for 2 centuries, so there was a significant Islamic population, as well as Jewish enclaves. Then there were North Africans and Moors, the Normans of his mother's people, and of course the Germans who'd settled there after his father. It was an extremely cosmopolitan society, and Frederick had been shaped by it. So while his new wife found his manners uncouth and Frederick unschooled for courtly life, he also did have a natural charisma and spoke Sicilian, Greek, Latin, Arabic, and French provincial. In other words, his table manners were bad, but his dinner conversation was excellent. Though Frederick and Constance's relationship would be fairly distant and unaffectionate. They'd only have one child, their son Henry, and were often separated. Yet, she did transform Frederick into the man he'd become. Constance whipped him into shape, and soon the natural charisma Frederick displayed on his ambles through Palermo also had the boot polish of courtly manners. Which was very fortunate, because while he'd probably rather be hunting and training his birds, Frederick pretty much immediately had to start acting like a king. His immediate priority was taming Sicily and southern Italy, a thing that, theoretically, should have been made easier by the fact that Constance had brought 500 knights with her as part of their marriage agreement, except that most of those knights died in an epidemic, leaving Frederick with few military options to subdue the barons who'd become formidable and independent in the vacuum of power that his parents had left. So instead, he turned to his political and legislative power. He ordered every landowner in his territory to present their titles, trying to systematize what were crown lands and which were granted to others. Oh, and if you couldn't prove that your land was yours, hey, look at that! New crown lands. This was an attempt to re-establish that centralized authority the Normans had brought to both England and Sicily. Also, it was not popular, as you can imagine, among the barons, who were not going to let this pissant little teenager tell them he was their ruler now. In fact, one essentially said that to his face. So Frederick threw him in jail and dismissed another noble who challenged him. But when they raised rebellions, Frederick beat them down, helped massively by Innocent III, who wielded excommunication as a weapon to help Frederick establish control. And that dissent among the barons created a handy opening. See, while Frederick was growing up in Sicilian chaos, the Holy Roman Empire was in chaos as well. Henry's brother Philip succeeded him on his death, but there were plenty of barons who'd gotten tired of his Hohenstaufen line, and instead backed a man called Otto. For a period, the empire was split, with two emperors. But when Philip was murdered by Courtier, for reasons that still remain unclear, Otto was made sole emperor with Innocent's blessing. And in thanks, Otto immediately turned around and invaded Italy in support of, let me just check here, Frederick's rebellious barons. Not only that, Otto besieged Rome, demanding that Innocent III rescind a previous agreement allowing the Pope to appoint the Holy Roman Emperor's bishops. Innocent, of course, excommunicated Otto. But here's where destiny starts to step in. Okay, so not everyone back in the empire was very happy with Otto, especially those who had backed Philip before he died. And those German nobles suddenly remembered, hey, Henry's son is kicking around down there in Sicily looking pretty dynamic. And he's a Hohenstaufen. And while Otto is excommunicated, this kid Frederick is super tight with the Pope. So, a general council convened and declared Frederick, who, mind you, had never been north of the Alps and had little interest in what lay there, the new king of Germany. Which was perfectly timed, because you see, when the news reached Frederick, he was actually preparing for an invasion from Otto he knew he couldn't repel. In truth, he'd been loading up an evacuation fleet to take his court to North Africa and become a king in exile. But now, not only was that invasion not gonna happen, since Otto was preparing to run back to Germany to salvage the situation, but Frederick suddenly had two kingdoms, as long as he could get there before Otto consolidated power and be crowned ASAP. So, hopping on one of his preloaded ships, Frederick sped to Italy to take a meeting with Innocent III. A meeting he found deeply frustrating. Now, Frederick was grateful for Innocent's support. Don't get us wrong. It had been Innocent who helped urge the German nobles to declare Frederick king of Germany. But Frederick was starting to feel increasingly like Innocent was keeping him on a leash. See, in desperation, Innocent had gone against long-term church policy by backing the same man as king of both Germany and Sicily, and offering to bless Frederick's election as Holy Roman Emperor. And in return, he wanted Frederick to promise to not incorporate Sicily into the empire. In fact, he forced Frederick to name his son Henry, King of Sicily, and leave Constance as regent while he went to be crowned in Germany. A sort of down payment on splitting the monarchies, if you will. And oh boy, Frederick was not happy about that. Not at all. But he was under a time crunch. So he agreed and sped his way to southern Germany. Now, to say it was close would be an extreme understatement. Frederick's 300 men reached the city of Constance in southern Germany in early September and demanded entrance. They knew Otto's army was close behind. Initially, the garrison refused, declaring their undying allegiance to Otto. But when Frederick had a priest read the bull of excommunication against Otto, the city opened its gates and bid him enter. Then, only 3 hours later, I cannot stress how nuts that is, Otto and his starving army huffed up to the gates, requesting the welcome feast that they knew had been prepared for them, only to find there was none left to give. For Frederick and his army were in Otto's city, eating Otto's banquet, and they weren't going anywhere. 2 months later, Frederick was officially crowned King of Germany, though for the next several years he would rule only in the south. Otto still held the north. That is, until he was defeated and withdrew into his own little circle of followers to quietly die. But then, Frederick did something that surprised Innocent and all those watching. Heck, it might have even surprised Frederick a little himself. The newly crowned King of Germany, well on his way to becoming Holy Roman Emperor, he vowed to take the cross and go on crusade. But when he does so, his relationship with the papacy will have already soured. And this learned king, this scientist and ruler, will be in conflict with the papacy rather than being its puppet. For he will crusade while under the punishment of excommunication himself. What? Oh man, that is a defiant theme that seems a little too familiar even in today's news cycle, right? Seriously, if you look at the headlines, it seems like a lot of folks are out there running their mouth and just kind of getting away with it. Case in point, I just read how Trump recently said he hadn't, quote, ruled out military action to seize control of Greenland. And thanks to today's sponsor, Ground News, I can see that that's been reported by not only 600 news outlets on the left, right, and center, it's also been reported fairly evenly, meaning I hope that everyone equally thinks it's a dumb idea, but oh boy, I am not that lucky. Ground News, of course, is a website and app designed to help you pull back the curtain on media bias. Every day they collect thousands of news articles and organize them by showing you exactly how news stories are being covered and compare the ways different news organizations cover the same topic from all across the political spectrum. And they achieve this with a super handy visual breakdown of every story's political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. On that note, going back to the story about Greenland and Trump, not only can you see all of the news outlets and their biases, you can even compare headlines and see how the biases might be affecting their framing. For example, the left has an outlet calling these statements, quote, imperial domination fantasies, while on the right, the Washington Times declares that, quote, Trump plants MAGA flag on the world stage. But Ground News takes it even one step further by providing summaries of the specific differences between the left and right's reporting. Actually, that brings me to my favorite Ground News feature, which is their blind spot feed, which highlights stories that are disproportionately covered from one side of the political spectrum, and honestly, it does help keep me honest in the news that I am consuming. Ground News is just a super helpful tool for sifting through all of the daily misinformation and bias, making the media landscape more transparent than ever in a time that I definitely need it, and I honestly can't recommend it enough. And best of all, right now we are offering viewers 40% off of Ground News' Vantage subscription, so go to ground.news/extra and get some news that you can really use, right? So again, for just a way better news feed, click or scan right here, and then once you're in the know, check out our next video here. How to accurately describe Zeliad's architectures, Lotus Wolf, Kuya Koi, Joseph Blame, Hunter C, Dominic Valenciana, Arclight Games, and Angelo Valenciana being the best legendary patrons? I don't know, but they are!